welcome to the 5th Annual Vibrant Living Expo and Culinary Showcase. My name is Monica Landry, and it is my pleasure to introduce our next presenter. Living Light head chef and instructor Matt Samuelson was previously head chef at Living Light from 2000 to 2004. From 2004 until 2009, Matt traveled the world as a personal chef to high-profile clients and some celebrities. He is a restaurant consultant, develops and formulates recipes for raw food production companies, is a teacher and a caterer of raw food retreats. Matt also launched a raw organic chocolate company called High Integrity Foods with his partner, Chris Peck, developing a premier raw chocolate bar, Golden Bean, that is sold worldwide. Please give a warm welcome to Matt Samuelson.
Well, thanks for coming out today. I'm going to make one of my favorite dessert recipes. It's actually an older recipe. I haven't made it in a while, but I made it last week for our pastry arts graduation, and everyone seemed to like it, so I thought that I would do it for the demo. So this is kind of, it's a little bit labor intensive, but it's one of those desserts that if you really want to make something that's going to get people's attention, this would be the way to start. The idea is that we're making some layers that are going to be dehydrated, and then later on, after it's fully dry, and the layers aren't very interesting on their own. They're kind of, not bland, but they're just kind of hard, because when they dry out, they get pretty brittle. But then you layer them with strawberry jam or other fruit jam. You can use cherries, raspberries work really well too. And then you put it in the refrigerator overnight, and then kind of like the way the tiramisu works, with the ladyfingers swelling up and getting all soft, the cake layers absorb a lot of the liquid out of the strawberry or other jam, and then it ends up being really a soft, tender cake. And because it's got zucchini pulp in it, it helps keep it a little bit lighter than just being all pure nut-based like a lot of raw food cakes can be. So we're going to start out first by making the cake part. To do that, we've got some zucchini here. Actually, I'm going to switch my equipment real quick. Now, you can also do this in the Champion. The truth is, when I made the large cake that's going to be served to you all for samples, I just did it through the Champion juicer, and it's a lot faster. But for doing it at home, I was trying to be mindful of not using too many different bits of equipment for one recipe, so I figured Vitamix and a Cuisinart was probably enough. Okay, good. So we'll start out by just cutting the zucchini up. So if you put them through the Cuisinart for about 2 minutes or so until they become all pureed, then you just squeeze all this through a juice bag or a nut milk bag. And the idea is that if we were to use everything with all the juice in it, the layers would taste a little bit like zucchini. What we're going for is the pulp adding some fiber and some lightness to the mixture, but not a whole lot of flavor. And zucchini is good about that anyway, but I think if we had 7 of them in here, it'd probably be a little bit detectable. Usually once it gets going and broken down a little, I find it's a good idea to stop. Rubber spatulas. Thought we had 2 of them. Yeah, but there's usually one right on the tray. But anyway, yeah, I'll use this one. Somehow they didn't come out. I'll just set them there, it's fine. Okay, so zucchini are so high water content that you really don't need to add any additional liquid. They'll kind of generate their own pretty quickly. And I'm going to use this opportunity to flip my board, since this is the side we use for fruit. That's a good tip. If Sherry didn't mention it in her demo, maybe she did. I won't bore you with it then. But use the side with the moat. That helps remind you which one is good for juicy things like fruit. Okay, that's just about there. Going to give it one more little scrape down. See how stuff kind of migrates up the sides? You want to make sure you get everything in there so that it doesn't, some stuff stick to the side and not get blended. Now, how do you hold this? Oops. Okay, that looks pretty good. So we're going to pour this in the nut milk bag. I usually recommend using nut milk bag with a seam on the outside. It just makes it easier to clean in the long run. Now, a cool little trick you can do with the Cuisinart, it's not as important right now, but a lot of times you have gooey things on the blades and you're trying to get it all scraped off. It's much easier to just put it back in, and spin it, and then it's as clean as you could get it. Alright. Just a little bit left, but on principle we'll go ahead and just use it all up. That could be your bite. Okay, so I'm going to have Noelle go ahead and squeeze that out. Don't be stealing my knife. You can bring it right over here. So when you squeeze it out, you want to get a decent amount of liquid out of it, but you don't want to squeeze it dry. That's the thing about with a nut milk bag. You can really just wring it out to the point that there's nothing left except a tiny bit of fiber. You want to have some moisture. You want it to be a pulp that's, you could scoop it up and it's like, it's not dripping, but it's definitely not just dry, because otherwise you won't have some of that lightning power of the zucchini. That looks pretty good. Anyway, I'll get this rinsed because we're going to use it for the strawberries too. Actually, I should have a dry bowl, but oh well. I'll just dry it out. So I'm just going to take a minute right now and say that I went out of order on this. If you're following along with the recipe, you'll notice that it's supposed to start with the coconut and with the pecans. But probably because I'm back there supervising a big team of people making food for the cafe and not thinking only about my demo today, I completely went out of order. The reason that I recommend to do this order that I'm going to show you is if you have just one bowl like I do, you don't have to stop and clean it. If you start with the dry ingredients first, the wet ingredients don't mind, but the other way around doesn't work so well. So pretend you didn't see that, and that we're coming back to that in just a minute. Yeah, okay. It's a good thing I'm not being graded on this. Students would lose points for something like that. Okay, so here we've got two of the other main ingredients in the layers themselves. We've got pecans that have been soaked and dehydrated. You can also use walnuts. They work really well. I like pecans a little better. To me, they're a little bit sweeter, but if you soak and dehydrate them, walnuts work just fine, and you can also use a mixture if you want. So first off, we just put the pecans in, and we're going to tumble them around real quick, just grind them into a meal. We don't want to go too long because pecans and walnuts in particular can turn into nut butter really fast, and that's not what you're going for. The way you can tell when it's getting close to butter, if you watch on the bottom where the blades are, you can see little bits of oil starting to bead up. You want to stop then, because otherwise, once that begins, it'll start getting clumpy, and that's not what you're looking for. So this is pretty good. It's kind of like the texture of roughly like a graham cracker crust. So we're going to put that in in a bowl. And you might ask, well, why don't we do the pecans and the coconut together since they're all being ground up? And the answer is, if you hadn't already guessed, that they grind up at different rates. The coconut's going to take a little longer, and by the time that was where I want it, this would be a butter, and it would just be a big gooey mess. So we want to avoid that. Next, we put the coconut in. You can use chipped coconut too, it just takes longer. The idea is start with the smaller pieces and it takes less time. If you're doing a big batch, say you want to make it for a dinner party and you're doing 2 or more cups, you can just put this in the Vitamix and it'll happen in like 10 seconds. It's really, really fast to turn into powder in there. 1 cup or less is kind of hard to do in a Vitamix because it just sprays all over the sides. So we'll let that go for a minute. Okay, that looks about perfect, right on. And you can just dump that and then bring back the bowl, please. And just on a trivia note, you can also make coconut butter. You know, that product that they sell now, that like from, I forget which company, but it's kind of like, yeah, it's a great thing. I actually came across that by accident years ago, back in like 2000 or so, when I walked away from this, when I was making something for a recipe, and I came back, I was like, oh wow, I have coconut butter. And it's really easy to make. You can do it in like about 5 minutes or so in here. In there too you can do it. Or you can just buy theirs and not have to bother with it. So while that's doing its thing, I'll just get this out of here. And one thing I realized, the notes on that recipe are sort of based on me always making this in really large quantities. And I've got the part about taking the pulp and the ground up nuts and coconut and doing it all by hand in a bowl. When you're doing a home size amount, not a huge vat like I was doing, you can actually, once this is all ground, you can just put everything in there together. So we're going to let this go a little longer. It's getting close. You can see a little butter starting on the side, but there's some still kind of larger pieces. The idea with the coconut is that you want to have it where there's still some texture from it, but you know how shredded coconut can be kind of like that straw-type texture? You don't want that distracting from the cake-like texture that you're going for in the layers. Okay, that's just about there. And this looks good. See how it's definitely got a little bit of moisture in it, but when I squeeze it, not much comes out. But there's still a fair amount of mass there, so that's going to really help to balance out the heaviness from the nuts. Okay, that's good. Now we can just put kind of like clear a little of this off the sides first, because some of the oil kind of makes it stick. Another little tip on the Cuisinart, when you're using a spatula in there, use the square edge in the square corner. A lot of times people just reach in there and kind of poke whatever way. But if you ever find that you're catching your blade, it's because you're coming at the front of it. Always come from the behind it. And see how clean you can scrape the corner? You don't get all wedged in between the blade and the side. And we'll put in this. And we'll put in our pecan meal. And then for sweetener, I've chosen date paste. Main reason is it's nice to use whole fruit for sweetener whenever you can, but also because to add to the texture of the cake, this is a lot nicer. It's going to help bind it a little bit, better than, say, agave or something like that would. And it's a nice flavor that complements chocolate really well. Sometimes just plain agave in certain recipes, it's almost too thin to stand up against the intensity of raw cacao. And dates are going to have that more of a caramely quality to them, so they blend a little bit better in the flavor. Generally, the ratio is if you're using large dates, you're going to maybe have, well, let me give you a volume measurement. Say 1 cup of packed dates is probably going to give you 1.25 cups or so, maybe 1.5 cups of date paste, depending on how loose you want to make the date paste. So we've got the date paste. We've got some vanilla extract. You could also easily use whole vanilla bean. You just scrape the insides. That would be great. An optional ingredient is there's a brand of coffee substitute called Inca. Well, it's not really a substitute. It's a grain coffee. And it adds a nice little bit of richness, kind of almost like a mocha quality to it. But if you don't want to keep it all raw, you wouldn't have to add that. And then we've got some raw cacao powder. What's that? On the recipe, I've got 1/3 to 1/2 cup. And you'll notice a lot of those measurements, they're not one measurement. And I really want to emphasize here that that's a big part of raw food cooking. If you haven't heard this before, raw food isn't standardized like what comes in a Duncan Hines box or something. You know, this isn't like white sugar and Crisco shortening. Every single batch of zucchini is different. Every single batch of pecans is different. Every shipment of raw cacao is different. So you really have to give yourself a little more permission to start with the baseline of what's given in the recipe, and don't be afraid to keep adding more. I mean, the analogy I always use is, okay, if someone's making a cup of tea, you know how much honey you like in it, or how much cream or whatever you put in it. No one has to tell you when it's sweet enough. So think about that when you're making. Like, start with what they give you. That's a good baseline, but don't stop and go, oh, well, it says 1/2 cup. That's all I can put in. Just keep going. And generally with, say, cacao, your ratio is roughly twice as much sweetener to whatever the amount of cacao. So if I add an extra tablespoon of cacao, I'm probably going to add an extra 2 tablespoons of dates if I'm trying to get a balanced flavor. That's assuming it isn't balanced already. And we're putting in some salt. Salt really helps to tie the flavors together. It also brings out vanilla flavor. Okay. That's pretty close. Get those edges scraped down. Now, one thing that's helpful with this recipe too is making sure you get most of the excessive liquid out of that zucchini, because when we go into dehydrating, one of the things that happens, I'll show you in a minute, is that the higher the water content you have in, say, a batter, when it dries, the more chance of it fissuring. And I'll show you that in a minute, because once that water's gone, all that space that was occupied when you spread it out and it was this big, the water leaves. What's in between? Nothing. So the stuff starts to crack like the desert after the rain when it dries out. Not the end of the world in this recipe, but it's just something to be mindful of. If you start with a really wet mixture, you're going to have cracks. Also a good thing to think of when you're doing cracker batter and things like that. Okay, so this is really well mixed. Let's just have a little taste. Should be about right. Yeah, it's good, but it needs a little more sweet. Could you bring me a little more date paste, please? I probably shouldn't say that. I could just pretend it's delicious and spread it out and not say a peep. And you guys would never know, because you're not going to eat this one. But I want to eat it later, so I want it to be good. So I have my interests. Yes?
What did you say, 1 cup of packed dates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Makes how much paste?
Around 1.25 cups, 1.5 cups, depending on how much water you add and what consistency of paste you want. Oh, cool. Well, let's squirt a little agave in there then. Okay. Bring me a pitcher, please. There's enough dates in there to bind it well. Agave isn't my first choice, but it'll be fine. And you guys will never know. So in the meantime, I just want to show you what, no. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Bring me the pitcher. Perfect. Never mind, there is no meantime. looks pretty good. Hey, in the meantime, can I get you to start, just get a cutting board and start slicing these really, really thin? Sure. That's better. It doesn't have to be super intense, though, because a lot of the way this recipe works is that a lot of the flavor is coming from the or whatever berry or cherry jam you're making and the chocolate sauce that's going on top. So this can be, as I said earlier, a little on the plain side. You don't want it to be boring, but it doesn't have to be the star, because really when it all comes together, that's when it starts to take on this true flavor. So I find for spreading out things, or anytime you're going to work with the mixture you've done in the Cuisinart, better to just take a minute and get the whole thing out instead of like every time you're going for another scoop, trying to scoop around the blade and all that. Just take a minute, get it all out, get it in a bowl. It's also easier on this recipe if you're doing, say, a double batch to make a larger torte. You can portion it off, kind of eyeball it. It's much easier to see what you're dealing with. So this is a great example of when that spinning technique works really well. These things have so many parts. Okay. So we'll give that a quick little rinse in the meantime. Yeah, just do that first. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let me have you pause that and just go give this a quick rinse. So we've got a pretty nice bowl of batter here. This is going to be spread out on one dehydrator tray. I like to use an offset spatula. Everyone's kind of got their own method, but I find for this sort of work, this is one of the nicest tools to have. And you notice it's pretty stiff. It could be a little looser, but then we get into that thing I was talking about with the fissuring. So this is actually a really nice, pretty tight mixture. So tight that it moves the Teflex everywhere. So I'm going to pretend that this is all perfect and finished, because I think you guys get the idea that it's just going to be right to the edges. Actually, I will show you one little trick that I recommend. Once you come up to the edge, just kind of leave your edge a little bit high. And then when you get to the final part, you can come back, kind of push it back, and give it one more little leveling. And then once it's all nice and neat, you put it in the dehydrator. And then through the magic of yesterday, it comes out like this. And see how it's fissured a little bit? That's not a big deal, because it's going to be all covered up. You're never going to see it anyway. I haven't found a lot you can do about that. It's just inherent in the mixture. I could put a little bit of a binding agent in there, which I might play around with. The thing is, what I was trying to avoid is when you add binding agents like, say, flax meal or chia seed works well, there's also kind of a telltale mucilaginous, sort of gelatinous, slimy, sometimes we say, feel to it. And I really wanted that really nice, soft, delicate texture of cake without any interference from that. So because this is all going to be layered and covered up, it's not really a big deal. So that's what you're going to go for. That's going to go in the dehydrator at about 115 degrees for the first couple hours, and you're going to turn it down to 105. And sometime in the third or fourth hour, maybe 5 or 6, depending on what your humidity is where you're doing this, you're going to find that you can take this out, pull it off the Teflex sheet that you've spread it on, and just lay it on the screen and let it dry till it's fully dry. This is pretty much as dry as it's going to get. About 18 hours or so does that. And as I said, it's hard. You know, if you just ate a bite of this right now, it's so-so. You know, it's sweet and it tastes kind of like chocolate. But the real star is when you put the fruit and the other things with it. So we're going to move on to making those components next. Why don't you hand me the bowl and I'll do a couple of those too. So we've got some beautiful strawberries here. I will say that I kind of prefer it with raspberries. Probably shouldn't tell you guys that, but all the raspberries got used up and I got stuck with strawberries, so I had to make it work. So what we're going to be doing with the strawberries is half of them are going to be sliced really thin. You can do it with your slicing blade if you want. I just wanted to put Noelle to work for a little bit so it looked like she had something really important to do out here. She actually does because she set everything up and now she's here helping me with the berries. We're going to do half in the Cuisinart though. So I'm going to put about this many in here. Give the rest here. I'll keep 1 or 2 out on this side. And those can all be sliced up. And we're going to make a jam. When you're doing raspberries, you don't even have to really do anything with the other half of the fruit because it's already so soft and it kind of just mushes up nicely. But strawberries, I like them sliced in. And then we're going to add some dates. I recommend you soften your dates if you store them in the fridge. It's a good idea after you've pitted them to put them in the dehydrator and just in a warm place. Let them come at least to room temperature. Dehydrator can warm them up and they get really soft. What that does is it just makes them a lot easier to distribute and blend into the berries better. And we also have a couple other components I wanted to show you. I like this jam to be pretty intense flavor because it's standing up against the chocolate. Oftentimes strawberries can be a little on the watery side, so I put a little bit of lemon zest in there. Actually, quite a bit. And you can we'll put this in last, but we'll probably end up putting a little psyllium. And then I like a little bit of lemon juice too. So just get those seeds out. I think I got actually the seediest lemon we had in the whole kitchen. Thought I was doing a good thing using it because I already had the zest removed. Yep. It's got plenty. So does everyone have kind of an idea why I'm adding lemon juice to this? Probably not, or you wouldn't have come, right? Okay. So here's an interesting thing about balancing flavors, is that to create intensity of flavors, you need to have the opposing components loaded really heavily. I think of it kind of like a balance, or a teeter-totter. This is probably not a good idea. Okay, that's balanced, right? Now I can still be balanced even if it's sagging, right, on both sides and they're like bent way down, because you've got a lot of sweet on one side from the dates and you've got a fair amount of tart from the lemon. Same thing, think of Coca-Cola. That's why Coca-Cola is so intense. You've got a fantastic amount of acid in there, and if it weren't for the incredible amount of sweetness that they put, that acid, well, you see what it does to nails, right? So here it's a little more of a benign kind of a thing, but what's happening is, again, we're building two components, sweet and sour, that are like opposites, loading them up heavy, and that's what lifts the whole flavor of the fruit. So even if you have some pretty kind of mediocre berries, you can boost up the flavor by adding the sweet and the sour to it. And it'll come out really nice. You'll see in a minute here. These berries are decent, but, you know, they're still white in the middle, even in the middle of summer. Not that thrilling. Okay, so we'll put those in there. And then we're going to get the, where's the lid? Oh, yeah. Okay. Say again? No, that's a great question. With raspberries, you wouldn't necessarily. And the truth is, it's not a standard amount. It's different every time. You have to taste your fruit, just like I was talking about before. It's going to vary. These berries, I know from working with them earlier, are particularly, I mean, they're all right, but they're just not like amazing red all the way through the middle. If they were, or if I went and picked like a whole thing of wild strawberries, I probably wouldn't need to do anything except mash them with a fork and not even add sweetener, you know? So you really, that's a great example, again, of just being sensitive to what your raw materials are. And I can't emphasize that enough in raw food. Okay, so this is just about there. Do you want to go back and see if Megan started on slicing up those samples? Thanks. The other thing I did in the one that I made that I'm serving you guys is actually put a little bit of beet juice in there because my color wasn't as bright as I wanted it to be. So a little bit of beet juice will add color without adding really any significant flavor. So that's a little trick with berries that are white in the middle. Beet powder works well for that too. It's a good little thing to have in your bag of tricks for your pastry stuff because it's great for coloring frostings and glazes and things like that. Cool. All right, so this is looking pretty good. That's a decent thickness. See how it picks up? It doesn't just run right off. It kind of hangs. So let's see where our flavor's at. That's pretty good. Could actually use a little more lemon juice. But I'm not going to worry about it. It's fine. Huh? I know, I'm not going to deal with that right. Well, wait a minute. This is a high-tech raw food culinary institute. I bet you we have a little screen strainer within hand's reach. Look at that. This is Sherry's demo station. What else would there be? And I actually want to put a little bit more zest, too. Zest is really nice. You got to be careful with zest. It can kind of take over and make something a little too intense. But in this case, the amount of sweet from the dates really helps. And the dates are, of course, helping giving us a binding quality, too, to the jam. That seems a little better. And once we get our flavors done, perfect. Then we're going to put in a little bit of psyllium. That helps hold it together too. Psyllium husk is what Metamucil is made out of, if you don't already know that. And then you just powder that up, and it makes a really excellent binding agent. Don't put too much, though. It comes out with this texture like mini tapioca. It's kind of weird, so it can definitely ruin a jam. Okay, cool. So can you give me the cleanest of those mixing bowls? It's fine, because it's all going in the same place. Okay, so got our nice jam base, or coulis, I guess it's called on the recipe. I was trying to make it sound all fancy. That's the thing we do a lot in raw food. If we don't want to call something just a really simple thing, we want to make it sound like really special, we just use a French name for it. Okay, so I'm going to spin that last little bit off. What? No. And we'll put our sliced up berries right in there. Okay. Put these aside. All right, you're thinking, when is this cake thing going to happen anyway? Okay, we made the layers. Now we've been messing around with jam. What's next? Well, we're going to make one more component. And I will mention that on this recipe, I've kind of amped up the quantities on both the jam filling and on the chocolate sauce. The chocolate sauce is because to get a good vortex in the Vitamix, you need a certain minimum quantity to blend. And this chocolate sauce keeps really well. So if you have extra, I figure you wouldn't mind. But if you're really tight on ingredients, you could, if you have a smaller Vitamix vessel, you could have the chocolate sauce and then just have a little bit extra. But I like to keep it around. It's good for just about anything. Good on raw ice creams or other fruits or whatever. So we need this tray. And can you get me a little bit of warm water, please? Just in a Get me 3/8 of a cup, please. Yeah, couldn't do it until now. Thanks. So this chocolate sauce is really easy. It's got agave nectar in it. We don't have any dark agave right now, so we're just using all amber. But as I mentioned before, sometimes on its own, just light agave is a little bit thin for holding up the chocolate. We've got so many other components in here, it's not going to make a big difference. And then we're going to put in a little bit of salt. And we're going to put in some vanilla. Not really 2 tablespoons. Can you bring me some vanilla too, please, when you come? You can never have too much vanilla. And we've got some raw cacao powder. Apparently we have a shortage on warm water. The reason I'm using warm water is because... Oh, I already got it, thanks.
You already got it?
Yeah, you want to just grab the jar of vanilla extract, please, or the bottle. The warm water is important because at the end of this recipe I'm adding a little bit of molten cacao butter, and it just helps it fully emulsify. If you put it in and it's too cold, you're instantly going to have it kind of form little globules, and that's not really what you're going for. So you turn, watch out in the front row, turn your Vitamix on low, and then just add your cacao powder. Add it slowly so that it doesn't get all clumped up. You're going to need to turn up your speed a little. If you don't have the Vitamix with the variable, you're going to be struggling on this one. So you could actually do this just with a hand beater, like a mixer. That would work all right. You could do it with a spoon or a whisk too. It would just take a little bit longer. Okay. I don't know if you can see in there right now or not. We've got an overhead shot. Got a nice vortex. Now what I want you to see, I'll move this. Oh, going counterproductive. All right. What I want to show you is, I need that butter. See how nice it looks right now, but watch, as soon as I add the cacao butter, totally takes on a different look. It gets really shiny and glossy. And we're going to put in just a little more vanilla because we can. So that's about it for the sauce. Pretty nice. And because of the cacao butter, it's going to thicken up nicer when you refrigerate it. The other thing is there's quite a bit of absorbing power in the cacao powder itself that hasn't even really fully swelled up from hitting the liquid yet. So that both of those things together are going to make this go from something that's really nice and pourable to something that holds really good. And you'll see that when we bring out the sample in a minute. So now we get into the really fun part. We're going to assemble this thing. So first off, we've got our nice layer here. Cracks don't matter, not a big deal. We're going to cut that into 4 pieces. Now, this is a pretty rich dessert, so the serving size that I'm going for here, that's what I'm going for, is it's basically 1/4 of this, or even half of that, because it's intense. And if you wanted to make more, you could double it, make thicker layers. You could cut it into thirds and make a long skinny cake. There's a lot of different ways you can configure it. You could get really fancy, make little individual ones that you all stamp out. It's pretty much endless. So we want to cut this evenly into fourths. Hey, Megan. Come on out. Sure, why not? You could get out your ruler if you want it, but this is pretty close. So, yeah, those are nice. So now we're going to put a little bit of chocolate sauce on the bottom. Offset spatula works really well for that. And then put that down. Next, we put a generous layer of the strawberry jam. Towel. What's that? Yeah, why don't we go ahead and start passing that out. So now we go ahead with a layer of this. And you can, this is a point where you can kind of decide how you want this thing to show up. If you want it to be ultra neat and clean, you might want to start with it on some other thing than the plate you're going to be serving it on. I kind of like when the jam spills out the side a little bit and the chocolate drizzles down over the edge, but it's really a personal choice. I've made it before where I've done it really neat and then even cut the sides really clean after and got it all cleaned up and then even glazed the sides so it's perfectly sheer, sheeny, smooth. It's kind of your, what else is going on in the meal and how you want to fit with those things. But be generous with the jam because this is all your moisture source for your cake layers. And then as you might guess, repeat. So then just put the next layer. Usually what I find is if I put one of the pieces that doesn't have any cracks in it on the bottom, you can kind of stash the pieces that have any fissures in the middle, and it hardly matters at all, because once it swells up, it all kind of sticks together pretty well. And then another layer of jam. Want to make sure you have your jam fairly even, and also try not to have any big slices of berries or doubled up berries in any one spot, because you'll create a high spot that then as the absorption goes on, it won't settle evenly. Well, we'll put that away from this. Oh, well, I'm going to get to that in a minute, but the question is how long in the fridge once it's assembled? Generally, I do it overnight. With this cake, I had to experiment a little because, well, without boring you with the details of what's going on back there, my layers weren't done when I needed them done yesterday, so it didn't go in last night. It went in this morning, and I came in early, and the fridge wasn't going to cut it, so I stuck the whole thing in the dehydrator, and I cranked it up for a while, and within about 2 hours, everything was, well, you guys can tell me if the middle's soft and tender or not yet. But that's what happened, and then I just stuck it in the freezer to set the glaze. So there's one more layer. Fun thing with this, you could really you could take it as high as you want to. You could make 9 layers and have a huge thing and stack it really high and then pin each piece and lay it on its side. I mean, there's just a lot of different ways that you could do it. No. Only on the top, and that's coming in just a moment. Particularly make sure your edges are high enough as far as the thickness of the jam, because sometimes the edges kind of want to bow up or warp a little as they're expanding when they soak up the moisture. And then if they're not touching completely, you'll have little dry spots, or little, not really dry, but hard spots in your cake. So once you've got that on top, kind of push it down real well. Doesn't hurt to pin it with toothpicks also if you're having trouble getting it all to stay in place. This one's doing all right. So now I'm just going to take a little bit of chocolate sauce. See, it's already setting up pretty good too, the sauce. I'm going to do a generous pour across the top. And this is also up to you how thick you want it. I kind of like to make it pretty thick because it's the only chocolate in here other than the cake itself. That should be good. And then just give it a final smoothing over. Kind of just bring it right to the edge and let it fall is what I like to do. And at that point, you just kind of let gravity and time do the rest. This is now ready to go in the fridge. Well, actually, I could spend another half hour trying to smooth it perfectly. I think you get the idea. Sometimes I like it kind of wavy instead of all like perfectly smooth. Oh yeah, and I got the hook, so I'll just do this. Final. And that's about it. Thanks. Yes. Question about cacao butter? Yes, cacao butter, you have to buy cacao butter. And cacao butter is simply the fat separate away from the fiber that's in a cacao nib. So when you take them apart, you get cacao powder and you get cacao butter. What's that? Oh, they had a little extra raspberry coulis, I think, in the back, and they probably just did that because it was easier to drizzle with. So thank you for your time. And question? Yeah. It was Ben Kingsley and Woody Harrelson and an actress named Emily Mortimer on the Trans-Siberian film that came out last year. Yeah. Good question. How long will it keep? Easily 3 days. After that, any kind of blended fruit generally starts breaking down. Oh, thanks a lot. Oh, and a little blatant promo, if you haven't tried already. I have this really good organic raw chocolate bar. I'll put out some samples. I know we got to clear for the next demo, but you guys can come and try a little if you want. And it's available downstairs or at goldenbean.com, our website.
You created the chocolate bar?
Yeah, about 3 years ago. It's all organic, agave sweetened, and anyway, I'll just put a little bit out.